Welcome back to Segmented Turning, Part 5. So first of all, before we go into the new material for this particular video, I want to show you how the last video finally finished up. Here is the curly eucalyptus vessel that I made last week, completed. 12 segment rings, 10 rings, solid base. And I just want to show you what the final piece looks like. We're going to do another vessel in the next video, not this one. But I'm going to use twice as many segments because I want you to see how this looks like brick laid, as I mentioned. It looks even more mosaic if I go to 24 segments. So I want to show you what the effect of more pieces in the same amount of space. It'll be the same size vessel, but done differently to illustrate some other new points. So let's get into the content of what I want to talk about in this particular video: spacers and veneers. Okay, I want to show you what the effect of using spacers and veneers. It doesn't change the technical aspect of segment cutting, but I want to show what that effect looks like. So here is one of my little miniature, what I call transitional vessels. It has a single segmented ring in it. And here's a segment, and it uses spacers. And the other thing I've added to this particular one, and you can see it in the base, between each of the spacers and on the top and the bottom of the ring, veneers. And what I like about veneers is they set the color between one and the other. They separate them very nicely. So I want to talk about how do you make a ring like this. Well, let's take a look at what we can do. Here's a ring with just spacers, segments, and a piece of holly in this case between each of the segments. And when you make this up into a bigger ring, you get effects like this. So there's yellow and blue together. Well, that's nice, but it's even nicer if I can put a veneer, different wood, on either side of the spacer. It just crisps up that line a little bit. So I want to talk to you about spacers and how I use veneers in segmented rings. First of all, what the heck is a spacer anyway? Well, there's our segment for a vessel. But if I want to put a spacer in to separate those colors, like something like this, what I simply do is I reduce the width of the segment by the width of the spacer I want to add. So the spacer and the segment occupy the same dimensions, the same angles, and the same widths. So the spacer has been cut straight and square, with the grain running the same direction as it is on the segment. So the segment grain is running this way. It's really important that these spacers have the grain running in the same plane, like that, so that when I have wood movement, it's controlled. The effect then to the eye is something like this. Here's a ring I'm just about ready to glue up. This has no glue on it at all. But we have segments, we have spacers, and little pieces of yellow veneer. Let me show you a blow up of that. There's my segment, there's my spacer, and here's my veneers. Now, gluing this up without the veneers is just the same as gluing up any other ring. I put the glue in the right places, and put a clamp around it, check it for squareness and no light gaps, and then clamp it down. But with veneers, I have to cut it so that these veneers work. Now, take one of these little pieces out for a second. The grain in this piece of veneer is running this direction. If I put it into my assembly this direction, I'll be exposing end grain. So I want to put it in so that the grain, in this case, runs vertically. Now that's against our flowing grain, but this is the only way I can have not end grain showing. The veneer has to be put vertically. Now veneer, how does it move? It doesn't move like wood moves. It moves with whatever it's attached to, whatever it's glued to. So I made up this ring like that. And when I glue this up, I'm going to put glue on each side of the veneer, I should say on the segment and on the spacer, and then wedge these veneers in together. It's a little tedious in doing that, but the effect is really pretty nice. Well, cutting veneers is a problem. It's a challenge, I should say, not necessarily a problem. If I take a piece of veneer like this, in the plane where the grain is going, this way, it's quite flexible. But if I try to do it along the fibers this way, I'm going to break it. It's going to crack. So what I do is I cut the veneers for my spacers into strips like this. And the grain is going to be going this direction. So what I would do is set my piece down here, mark off how tall each one of these needs to be, and then cut it. Trust me, scissors are not good. I bought a pair of special cutters. It's called Handy Cuts. I bought these from Craftsman, a Sears store. This blade comes down against an anvil and it cuts clean and straight through, and this works really great for cutting these at this point. They just cut clean. The scissors have a tendency to go like this, and many times will tear these fibers. So cut it on a flat surface with a sharp edge straight down if you can. These cutters work really nice. They do tend to fly a little bit. Well, how do I get the strip? First of all, well, I can cut it into strips. What I have done is I have two pieces of steel. It's actually stainless steel. This is flat, and this is just a straight edge. So I'm going to put my veneer under here. I'm going to figure out how tall that segment needs to be, the veneer for that segment needs to be. I'm going to bring my straight edge up against it. And I'm going to hold it down, and I'm going to use a utility knife. Now that tip, I put it on the grinder this morning and I sharpened it. So when I hold this down and run it next to the strip, I have a really clean cut. And I'm running with the direction of the grain mostly. I could cut across the fiber from time to time, but basically I have trimmed that. And now simply to cut the segments, as I showed you earlier, I lay them down. Remember, the grain's going this direction. And I mark either side, and there is my veneer. And I have a line across it, which reminds me which direction I want it to go in the vessel. This direction. So off camera, at home, probably with some music playing, I will sit down and carefully glue this ring up. And it's going to look like a 24 segment ring. It's really just our standard 12 segment ring like we've been doing, with little 1/8 inch spacers and veneers in between those. Now in the next video, I'm going to show you the sled I used to cut these spacers, because these are about 1/8 of an inch, and the difficulty on cutting with a table saw 1/8 of an inch and up is occasionally one may go flying and you'll have to go trace it down. But if you cut them narrower than that and thinner, then you may need some special ways of holding it. And I'll show you a little video clip in the next film about how I cut my spacers down to under 50 thousandths. So I have a vessel here that I'm working on. It's going to use this segmented ring. And it's going to be separated with veneers. So I glued one veneer on, and I put pressure on that and clamped it. And the reason I do that and do it separately is veneer is typically colored out of some fairly porous wood. So when this is glued on, the moisture in the glue is going to cause the fibers in that veneer to swell and expand, and they will contort and twist. So this needs to be under pressure until the glue is totally dry. So I had this clamped on my lathe, and now I can put it on our lathe here in a couple of minutes, and I can trim this, and I can cut the center of it out. I'm not going to use a gouge. I'll tear this across. So I'll show you how to do that at the lathe. We'll glue this ring on top of it. And then I'm going to show you how I make these thin rings by splitting this, and how I make smaller rings by going in and coring what's left over. So let's move out to the lathe, and I'll show you the next steps in this video. We're back at the lathe, and we're going to build a vessel, but we're using the veneers and the segmented ring. So the vessel's going to look sort of like that when we get done. So I've already glued this piece of veneer onto this bottom portion, but now I need to make it round and allowing a hole through here so I can glue on this segmented ring. Well, I've got to trim that, and I told you before that I cannot do that easily with a gouge, but I can do it very easily with the skew chisel. And this is what it looks like. I got my speed at roughly 1,000. I'm going to trim the outside first, down to just to the edge of the vessel. Well, I guess I didn't trim it down where I thought I did. Cut a little bit farther in and hit the edge of the wood, but that's okay, it's going to get turned down. But trimming it that fast with the tip of the skew chisel, and I need a hole in the center, and I'm going to take, about this much out, just like that. So now I have a segmented, not segmented, I have a piece of veneer that's been trimmed to the base. Now I've hollowed this just a little bit, only enough to allow me to do that action I just now did. And now the next thing I'm going to do then, because I flattened the sides on this ring already, I'm going to glue this on, and because I have a hole through the veneer, I can now use my cone to put pressure on this thing and glue it in place. So typically at home I probably would put glue on this, glue it down, go have lunch, take maybe an hour's break, but we'll probably do this in about 10 minutes here. So let me put some glue on this ring. And you notice I'm only gluing the outside edge because the inside is going to get taken away in a couple of minutes. So I'll put a little bit of glue on here. Just on the outside edges. Okay. Small cone on my live center works just fine on this one. Rotate a little bit. And we're keeping a little pressure on it because it is veneer and I don't want it to swell and buckle. And we're going to let that sit for a while. And then we're going to come back and we're going to separate this into 2 rings and then into 4 rings. Be right back. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes. The glue is set well enough for us to be able to go on to the next step. I'm going to part this into 2 separate rings, but to make the parting easier, I'm going to make this round. I'm going to keep the tailstock up for support. And I'm going to use my bowl gouge just simply to make this round, to make the next step just a little bit easier. Speed. That's about 1400, that's good. Okay, that's good enough for that. The side has been flattened, so it's ready to, when I part this, to put into another project. I've got a flat side here already. So now my next thing is I'm going to make 2 rings out of this one. And I'm going to use a commercial parting tool this time, still a thin kerf. I'm going to try to split it roughly in the center. So when this part's off, this ring is just going to continue to spin right here on the tailstock. Here it goes. So now I have 2 segment rings for the same amount of effort. And this side is flat, ready to be inserted into another project. So now this is not suitable yet. So it's going to help me to get this flat for this project. I'll go back to my bowl gouge. Check the flatness. Get a nice straight edge here. A little high right on the outside edge. Take it a second. And finish off with a sanding stick. Good. So now I can go ahead and build the next portion, but I can harvest another ring out of this by taking a piece out of the inside. If I use this tool, the height of the tool, given the curvature of this ring, this is going to bind. So I have a smaller parting tool, one that I have actually ground down to even finer tip, the point of which is to be able to come in here and cut these narrow rings like that. So now I'm going to core this. And I'm already through because I can see walnut burl dust coming through here. So this is done, and it's free, and there's another ring that we can use for another project. For this project, all I now have to do is do the hollowing here, attach the top portion to it, and finish the project. So for this ring, for this lesson, we talked about beginning to use spacers. For the next video, I'm going to show you what the effect is when you put more segments into a piece, and when we use a changing dimension on the spacers. And we're going to add a different kind of foot, a floating foot, to this project. So we'll see you in the next video. Keep the comments coming. We appreciate them. Hit the subscribe button down here. We appreciate that too.